Annie Fox, education writer and author of AQA A Level Drama play guide Our Country's Good, and Rima Georges, actor and lyric Hammersmith Theatre Springboard trainee, in conversation with Gary McCann, designer of set and costume for Our Country's Good. There are 3 chairs in the centre of a room with grey carpet and floor-to-ceiling windows behind them. Annie Fox is sat on the chair on the right. She's wearing a shirt with large white flowers, navy blue trousers and black trainers. She has short grey hair and is wearing spectacles, along with large blue and yellow earrings. Rima Georges is sat on the chair in the centre. She's wearing a pink shirt, pink shorts and black flip-flop sandals. She has dark brown, shoulder-length curly hair. Gary McCann is sat in the chair to the left. He's wearing a blue, long-sleeve shirt with the sleeves rolled up and khaki-coloured shorts with light brown ankle socks and grey walking shoes. He has short grey hair and a beard and moustache.
Could you please describe your vision and concept for the play Our Country's Good?
It's a really cracking script. I think we all appreciate that. It's dense. There's a lot of different layers to this. So on one hand, we're talking about something which is set in a very particular time and period, in a very particular place. But similarly, we're talking about a number of other things. We're talking about the potential and the influence of theatre on individuals. What happens when you step inside a theatre? What happens when you inhabit somebody else's shoes and become a performer and take on a role? And we're also talking about the British Empire and the sort of the reach and the influence and the power and the kind of terror of that. The literal sense of place, which is hugely important, but also the fact that we're in a theatre and we're making a show and it's a play within a play. Those are the ideas that I'm dealing with in terms of trying to manifest a scenography.
And when you were coming with those 3 ideas, did you think you were going to approach them naturalistically, or did you think this is going to be more symbolic? Or is it a combination of the 2 that you were thinking of?
It's a good question. It's a combination for sure. I think that what we're working on, and it's not that usual that I spend a lot of time in a rehearsal room. I am doing that currently because I want to kind of actually fully understand what the tone of the show will be. So it's simultaneously, I think, symbolic, but it's also very specific. And I think that's very much what the play itself is doing.
Part of the concept is that the set is very symbolic of the negative impacts of colonialisation on native land and population of Australia. Could you explain how this is going to work on stage?
For sure. So I can quickly describe the set, which I haven't done yet, and then I can sort of describe how that relates to what you just asked. So what we've done is we've got three aspects to the design. The first strand is the landscape, and I've simply built an enormous piece of Australian outback on the stage. So we've emptied out the theatre completely. We've opened it up right to the brick walls and the gantries and the metal conduits and the fire escape signs. And we're saying, this is a theatre. Look, we're inside a theatre. We're not apologising for that. We're showing people that we are in the theatre. But within this black box, I've built a very large landscape which fills it right to the back of the stage, spills over the front of the stage and goes right to the wings. And it's hopefully going to be treated very realistically. So it's going to look like a real piece of landscape sort of hovering inside a theatre space. So those are the 2 ideas of the theatre and the landscape. The third aspect is the question about the empire. And so what we've got as a front iron, it looks like it's a theatre iron, but it's actually a piece of scenery. We fly in right down stage, and it's an enormous metal door, which is painted with a Union Jack. And the Union Jack is kind of corroding and rusty, and this to me represents the empire. And this is how we get a sense that we're on board the ship at the beginning of the show. We have this sort of hulking metal structure, which I think represents barriers. It represents keeping people out, keeping people in, and it represents maybe the ship that they're saying. I know it was a wooden ship, of course, in the 18th century, but the sense of deportation and the shipping containers and things like that. So that's what the Union Jack iron, we're calling it the iron, like a theatre iron, like an iron curtain.
And so would acting happen in front of that?
Yeah, so it's at about 2 meters away from the front of the stage. And so it means that we can sort of perform certainly the opening scene in front of it. So the very first scene, as you know, is on the ship on its way to Australia, to the continent. And so we'll have the performers in front of this at the very beginning of the show, giving a sense of what the inside of the ship feels like. And then obviously we meet the narrator, the First Nation character, and we open up the set and we have this sort of blinding light and this landscape filled with exotic animals and birds, and we hear the sound of the birds, and so we go from this dark claustrophobic space to this open bright space.
And you mentioned with the Australian outback that you're opening up the space in the theatre. Is that something you wanted to do from the start, or is it when you came to see the space that you realised that you needed to make it more vast to represent the Australian outback?
Neither, actually. So originally I was thinking about maybe setting it inside a shipping container, but with a big pile of red earth in the middle. So you got a sense of the incarceration. But I quite quickly decided that wasn't what the play is. The play is epic and expansive. And so I felt it was more about opening the space up rather than controlling it and making it small.
So you do have some contained scenes, but also this vast space. How do you do containment?
I'm relying on having a very close relationship with the lighting designer. And one of the things I haven't mentioned yet, but relates to the theatre idea, is the fact that we're showing the lighting rig in a very deliberate way. And so at certain points, we will fly in a whole truss of lights, which will hover just over head height and create the sense of the beating sun or whatever. Or we may just fly an individual power can in, and the beam of that light will create the interior of a tent, let's say, where we have just a character who's caught in that shaft of light. So we're going to be playing around with both with lighting, but the actual lighting units themselves being on display as ways of evoking different environments, different times of day, obviously, focusing in on one character if they've got a monologue, and doing that very deliberately. So we're showing the audience this is the toolkit that we're using to tell this story in a theatre.
And just to be clear, so flying in is that you're bringing things from the fly space
Absolutely.
Down.
Yeah, so things rise and descend over the set, and as you would do if you were doing a pantomime, you'd fly in a cloth and you'd be in a castle. So we'll be flying in bars which will have these lighting units on them, and they will create really great effects, I think. We can blind the audience, create a great sense of heat and hotness and brightness, or intimate spaces and nighttime and shadows. And for me, set design is the engine that drives the play or the opera. It's not something that's passive, it just sits at the back. I'm not interested in just building a wall with doors and a window in it and having a sofa in front of it. That's not what I think scenography is. Scenography is something that evolves. It might just be evolving through lighting, or through simple pieces of furniture moving around the stage, but there has to be some sense of the overarching vision behind it and how that tells the story rather than like an individual component.
With this play, there are so many different scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I first read it, and I thought, wow, 3 distinct locations right at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. As a designer, was that a challenge for you? And how did you get your head around the fact that it's just going to have so many locations?
I think locations are important. I think meaning is more important. And I think the stage has to function to some degree as a metaphor for the meaning within the piece itself. So that's kind of where I start from, rather than thinking how I'm going to solve each particular scene. The great thing about Our Country's Good is its inbuilt theatricality. So, we were doing the read-through with Timberlake Wertenbaker yesterday, and there's a line, I was sat next to her, which was great, and there's a line where she writes, one of the characters says, "Oh, it's much better to set a play in the past, it's much clearer that way." And I just thought, this is amazing, to be sat next to this woman who's referencing her own work and what she's done and how she's written this play and why she's done the things she's done, and put it into the play itself. I think it's much more about symbolism's a strong word. I don't necessarily create sets which are symbolic, but it's about the fluidity of the staging. And we're in a theatrical piece where we're referencing the magic of theatre. So we expect the audience to use their imagination. We don't show them every location, we evoke them.
And I guess you mentioned the lighting as well, which is helping you to tell that, to help guide their eyes around where you want them to see.
Yeah, and I think, if you want to create a tent, you don't need to have stage management carrying on a tent and plop it on the stage for 2 minutes and then come back again and take it off. We know what a tent is. It's a dark space, it's triangular in shape, it has a very defined floor plan, and lighting can immediately do that.
You were just sticking to overarching story and meaning in terms of costume design for the production. How does the use of costume communicate the idea of status and hierarchy?
That's a great question, particularly with a piece like this. The interesting thing about the officers and the convicts is that they're in the same position, basically. One of them even gets caught stealing food and gets hung at the beginning of the play. So the costumes that we're considering for this, and the costumes are going to develop in conjunction with the cast. I don't normally do this. I normally just tell people what they're wearing and get on with it. But with this, I feel that to make the character specific and make the transitions from one character to another where people multiplay, we need a sort of bigger conversation with the director and the cast. And I'm going to be investing quite a lot of time here working with the cast, building these looks. Everyone's going to look kind of bedraggled, so they might just be wearing a sweaty vest, a pair of jogging pants, or a pair of jeans. But when they put on a red 18th century frock coat, they become an officer. And that's how we represent the major part of the changes that we're doing. They put on these coats, which are anachronistic, but we're not anachronistic because was the play set at the end of the 18th century, but they're anachronistic in terms of the other elements that we're putting them in: jeans, sweatwear, casual shoes. And I'm making a really clear point about that because the play is about today. It's very clearly about today. It was very clearly about the 1980s when it was written, but it's very clearly about today as well. When you put on a play, you look at it through the lens of the present. And we're putting it on because the themes are universal. It's about love, it's about desire, it's about power. It's a mashup of 18th century and modern, and that's a really deliberate choice. And for me, a scenography is a kind of dialectic, is a conversation. I put something on stage and I want people to kind of engage with the idea and engage with the space and think about it. So it's not, I'm not just saying, here's a room, here's a sofa, this is an environment that there's no conversation. The conversation has to happen in people's heads. That makes sense.